All right, we're gonna, if you want to get out your notes, we're gonna go over section 4 of your notes. The things dealing with a word study, linguistic considerations concerning word studies. All right, and I put a word up here. What does this word mean? All right. All right. Give me a definition of the word. Rod, give me one definition for that.
A savings and loan institution.
All right. So a place where you save money. All right. Mike, give me another one.
The land edge of a river.
All right. The edge of a river. The bank of a river. Right? All right. Give me another one. Yes.
When you have a V6, one bank of cylinders.
Yeah, a bank of cylinders for an engine. All right. Yes, Priscilla?
Depend.
A what?
Depend.
To depend, right. It has the idea of you can bank on it, right?
Oh, yeah.
Was that what you were thinking? Yeah, you can bank on it. Norm?
A collection of money, like you take home the bank.
All right. So, you can take home a bank of money. What are some of the common banks? We talk about a
Dr. McLean?
piggy bank. Yes, yes.
Yeah, let me get, I'm having trouble finding that page.
All right.
So I want to find out, you know.
Well, I'm not even talking about that page yet, but so
I'm still trying to find it.
it's a 4, and what page would it be on in your notes?
18.
Page 18. And I only gave you through page, I think, 14.
Right.
So you may have needed to print out the rest of it, but if you didn't, it's all right because we'll get you by on the lectures. I emailed you all of the notes in an email form, and then you were supposed to print them out or something. So, Eric, give me another definition of bank.
A storage place for memory.
A storage place for memory, like a what?
Memory bank.
A memory bank or a computer bank, right? Dealing with a computer. So we'll catch up on the notes here. But Phil?
To bounce off of.
To bounce off of, right. A pool table. See? Now if you'd have said billiards, I would have said what kind of places do you hang around them? See, it's a pool table in your home, but it's a billiards place at the bar. Yes, Minnie?
Blood bank.
A blood bank, right. You know? So, yes.
Like you bank to one side, a tilt.
Right. The idea of tilting. Absolutely.
A guarantee.
A guarantee. In what sense?
You can bank on.
Yes, yes, yes. You can bank on something. Yes.
A bank of food, a food bank.
A food bank, right. And so that ends up being, in a sense, a place of storage. So, yes, Rod?
A holding spot.
Holding spot. In what way? Well, Fort Knox, certainly. Yeah.
A water bank.
A water bank.
I mean, the bank of, you know.
Sure, of the river, or the bank of a body of water or something. Norman, and then Nate.
In general, it's just a collection of things, like a blood bank, a food bank.
Right.
It's all just a collection.
Right. Nate?
Somewhere where you can get a loan.
A loan, sure. Rather than just savings, there's a loan. So what we see is, and bank is, when we talk about grammatically, bank is both a noun, that is a person, place, or thing, as well as a verb. You can bank on it. He banked his way, he drove and banked his way through the curve, or whatever. Years ago, when I was pastoring in Chelsea, I had men who worked at the Chelsea Proving Grounds. And so we would go out onto the oval track, you know, and they'd be going 120 miles an hour, and they would say, hold on, I'm going to bank my way through the turn. So it has all kinds of noun, verb, yes.
Did you say it was an adjective? Because you could say like a bank facility.
Yeah, I mean, it could have an adjectival effect, just like in Greek, a noun can be adjectival, so you can have that in English too. So the main point is that a word takes on meaning in a context. And so you really don't know what a word means until you put it in its context. And in order to discover the meaning of a word, you really have to examine the context very, very carefully. All right? So we're at 4.1, and everything I'm going to talk about, if you don't have the notes, what I'm going to talk about is fairly general. I think that you can understand what I'm going to be talking about by just taking notes. But if you didn't print the notes out before, you'll certainly need to print the notes out. Now, and in fact, I can put these on overhead for us so that you can follow along on the overhead. Yes?
Are you still selling any of the book of notes?
No.
No.
You mean just the whole pages?
Right, the packet.
Yeah, I don't have any right now.
Okay.
But I have the information here that I can put on the overhead, and I think if you just watch, you'll get the concepts. The concepts are very simple. So you don't have to have all the notes to get the concepts. All right. First of all, words are arbitrary signs, right? Words are just a collection of letters, depending on what language that you have. You can have B-A-N. Is that a word? And then you can change that word significantly by adding another letter onto it, correct? What's that game that's out there, the game show that, you know, you add letters, you change letters?
Lingo.
Lingo. So, how many know about lingo? All right, just two nerds in the group. I knew about it too. So, but if you have B-A-N, what things can you add to change it? D. You go from band to band, or G, bang, or E. All right, so words are just arbitrary signs until we agree what they mean. And that's what creates language. Words are just arbitrary signs. Thus, two people who wish to communicate must agree on the meaning of a word. And single words by themselves, do not have any definite meaning. We saw this with bank. We can talk about a brick. You can have what different kinds of bricks? A concrete brick. You can have a, pardon me? A what? A hay brick. What other kinds of brick can you have? Pardon me? Clay brick.
A woman.
A woman?
The brick.
Uh-huh. All right.
The brick.
And you can also have a brick of drugs is called a brick, right? So, Kim, is this a personal testimony? All right.
I thought that was wrong because they came in my head.
All right. Now, the other thing about words is it depends on how you arrange words. Now in English, word order is very important. The man hit the ball hard. The ball hit the man hard. The man hit the hard ball. The hard man hit the ball. The hard ball hit the man. You see all the combinations that you can make. In English, word order is very important. In Greek, word order is not important. It is not as stable or structured as we have in English. So the second point is this. Again, words are arbitrary until we come to a common agreement, and then words depend upon grammar for their arrangement and for what they mean. The Greek word logos is translated by over 20 different words in English. One Greek word, 20 English words. The English word forgiveness has at least 5 or 6 different Greek words that are translated forgiveness, at least 3 or 4 different Hebrew words. And each one of them gives a little different picture of what forgiveness means. The same thing with like the word redemption and others. So we are going to begin to teach you a little bit about word meanings. But until you take Greek or learn more about logos and so on and so forth, your limitation for word studies is going to be there. But it's the old adage, if you can't do a word study in English, you can't do a word study in Greek or Hebrew or anything else. Now, the next thing is that word meanings overlap. You have synonyms, those words which are similar but might have a slightly different meaning. You also have words that are antonyms. Antonyms are the what? Opposite of words. So these are all the things that we have to have. Words change meaning over time. In the book of James, the old King James says, if a man comes into your assembly wearing gay clothing, right? And the old King James would give you the picture of maybe somebody like Max Klinger, right? From MASH. But gay way back then meant bright or colorful. Now it means something different. Also the word charity. The Old English, the word charity meant what? Love. Today it means giving something out pretty much for nothing. It's called government. The old King James says, let your conversation. Conversation was an old word for your conduct or your way of life. So there's many examples of this. And so the main thing that we're trying to say is that words only have meaning in a context of agreement. That we agree that this is what the word means. Sometimes when you say bad, you really mean what? Good. Good. Sometimes when you say bad, you mean bad. You don't know what it means. It's like, you know, the term hooking up, right? Hooking up means a whole lot of different things in different contexts. At least that's what I've been told. I have no idea. For me, hooking up means putting my trailer onto my car. Beyond that, I have no idea what it means. Now, words have what we call connotative, that's positive meanings, and sometimes denotative, we mean negative meanings. All right? For instance, here's an example. In Philippians, when Paul warns the Christians at Philippi, watch out for those dogs. Now, when you think of dog, what comes to your mind?
Pit bull.
Pit bull, all right. Well, you know, I think of my little Samson.
Right.
We called him Samson, but he's only 11 pounds. He's part Maltese, part poodle. He's a lap dog. He's an absolute cutie. But he will bark, and he will take on a bigger dog in defense. But, you know, when you see, watch out for those dogs, then you read those men who do evil, those mutilators of the flesh. Now, there's different words in the Greek language for dogs. One word was the lapdog, which would be the family, the house pet dog. The other one was for the roaming dog, who would roam the neighborhoods, roam outside the cities, roam the woodland area and attack people. That's the word that Paul is using here. So we really should expand the translation and say, watch out for those wild dogs, or those deranged dogs, or those vicious dogs, those men who do evil. And then he says those mutilators of the flesh. What does he mean, mutilators of the flesh? Well, in this context, he's been talking about the circumcised, right? The Greek word circumcision starts with the preposition peri. You have a parameter. What is a parameter? It's a circle, right? Everything with para is a circle. And the Greek word for circumcision is the word peri, to cut around. All right, that's what circumcision is. This word mutilators is the word circumcision, but not with peri on the front, but with kata. Kata means to cut off or to castrate. And so he's got a word play here in the original language. He says they think that they're the peri, the circumcised, but they're really the kata, the castrated or the mutilated. But words take on meaning in a context. Again, the Syrophoenician woman talks about, you know, even the dogs get some of the crumbs. She's talking about the household dogs. So, general principles about the interpretation of words. An obscure or ambiguous text should never be interpreted in such a way as to make it contradict a plain one. The words baptized for the dead in 1 Corinthians 15:29 should not be interpreted to mean that a person can be saved after he has died. This would contradict the plain teaching of Hebrews 9:27 that says it's appointed unto a person who wants to die, and after that comes the judgment, or other types of verses. Baptized for the dead means on behalf of the dead. It was a common practice in ancient Near Eastern religions. It's not unlike purgatory today, where if they say if you hold a couple of extra masses, if you have a special offering or whatever, in Rome, in Italy, there's a statue of St. Peter there, and the Catholic people are told if you rub his toes, you cut off some years in your time in purgatory. And so people will go up there and they'll rub it and they'll kiss it. In fact, they're going to have to replace the toes. They're getting worn out so much. Secondly, a complex, ingenious, or devious interpretation should not be given preference over a simple and more natural one. When Jesus said in Matthew 16:28, I tell you the truth, some of you who are standing here will not taste death before you see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. He was obviously not referring to the eternal kingdom or the millennial kingdom, because in the next verse you have the transfiguration, right? In the next section, where they could see the kingdom coming. So context is so important. Another one is a word does not usually mean what it originally meant. nor is its meaning often determined by its component parts. Words change meaning over time. So, what a word meant in the Koine period of, 200 BC to 200 AD is not necessarily the same thing that it meant 1,000 years before that, or 1,500 or 1,600 years before that. When you take Greek, you're going to learn about this. There is a massive Greek dictionary. In fact, if you were to look over there, you can see it towards the corner, a whole purple set of volumes. There's about 12 of them. One of the things in their theory of word study is they said, if we can get back to the original root, core meaning of a word, then we have the essence of it, and then we can trace that all the way through time. And you don't do that, because what you're doing is you're constantly bringing a meaning into the next generation, the next generation, the next generation. You're not seeing the changes. You always have to study a word within that generation or that period of time. One of the ones that I hear all the time is the word ecclesia.
Mm-hmm.
Ecclesia means the what? The called out ones.
Mm-hmm.
But we use it for it's translated as the church. All right? We have ecclesiastical bodies, right? We have ecclesiastical things. So you hear preachers that preaches really well. And they will say, now the Greek word here is ecclesia. It's made up of two words. Klesia, which means to be called, and ek out. So those in the church are those that are called out by God through election. Now that may all be true, but it doesn't come from the word. Because the Greek word ecclesia simply meant an assembly. It could be an assembly of donkeys. It could be an assembly of Jewish people. It could be an assembly of Christians. It could be a union assembly. Another mistake that people make all the time is they will say, well, in Webster's, this is what the word means. No, Webster's no authority for the Bible translation. The Greek is the authority for the Bible translation. And, there's a Greek word that is translated power, dynamis. We get our word what? Dynamo or dynamite. And I will hear preachers all the time say, this is the dynamite explosive power of the Holy Spirit, and they'll go on and on and on about dynamite. And it's got nothing to do with it. You have to deal with what the Greek word means, all right? So the meaning of words in English should not be read back into the biblical meaning. I think I told you about the sermon I heard years ago about a guy who was using the old King James, and he did this whole sermon about the difference between the Holy Spirit and the Holy Ghost in the King James Bible. And of course, they're both the same Greek word pneuma. It was just a literary style of sometimes they would translate it Holy Spirit, sometimes they would translate it Holy Ghost, but it was the same Greek phrase. The same word may have different meanings in various occurrences in the Bible. The word believe sometimes means an intellectual belief. Sometimes it means to trust. Sometimes it means to commit. The word fellowship. Paul uses the word fellowship different than James does. The word salvation. The word salvation sometimes means to be delivered physically. Sometimes it means to be delivered spiritually. The Net Bible. What's the Net stand for? Yeah, it's Dan Wallace. It has something to do with it's got to do with the internet. That's what it is. The Net Bible, the Internet Bible. And I know the majority of the translators on that group, and occasionally when I'm reading or translating, I'll send them a note. And in Matthew, it talks about, and the one who endures to the end shall be saved. Right? And when you hear the word saved, you think primarily I think of salvation, salvation saved. But it means delivered there.
Right.
And so I write them and I say, you got to make this distinction. It makes some people think that if you don't endure to the end, you lose your salvation. Right?
Right.
You know? It's not talking about losing your salvation. The one who endures to the end is delivered physically. They're delivered physically on into the kingdom age. They survive. And they make it to the end. So we need to watch those kinds of things. The same word in the Bible does not always mean the same thing. John wrote in John 1:5, darkness has not understood the light. The word understood can mean also to overpower or overcome the light. So there's just lots of things. And again, we saw this in the Samson assignment with the different translations of what it meant to be right. Each word or phrase normally has only one meaning, which is indicated by its usage in the sentence and or one of several contexts. A word should not be given all its shades of meaning. In other words, if a word, when we talk about a nuance, bank, bank had all those, it's what we call the field of semantic domain. It's all the possibilities. You don't plow them all into one verse. You find which one fits the verse the best. Yes?
Okay, so how do we verify the dialect that they used in their time? With the meaning of the word in their time?
Right.
How do we know in our time what they meant then?
Well, we know that it was the Koine period, the common period. Koine meaning the common Greek that was spoken in the trade, business, commerce language of the day. So we know that because there's a period of time, it's called the Romans. You remember the Romans came in, conquered the world, built the roads, created the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome, and imposed almost Greek, not Latin, but Greek as the language of trade. If you were to say, what's the common language of the world today? It's what? English. It's the business language of the world. That's why we say immigrants coming into the United States should learn what?
English.
So that they can assimilate into the business world, so on and so forth. Of course, that's quite controversial, but we don't like controversy, so we won't get into that. But I will teach in English. So, we know that because of the period of time, and then we can also look at all the business transactions and extra non-biblical usage that we have. But you see, an interesting point that is off of what you're saying is, what was the Bible of the disciples? The Torah. Was it Hebrew or Greek? It was Greek. Because only the synagogue and the rabbis and the specialists, they didn't even know the Hebrew at times. They spoke a form of Hebrew, Aramaic. And so that's why when Hebrew was read in the synagogue, somebody had to interpret it for them. But you see, when the New Testament writers quote from the Old Testament, they're quoting from that thing we call the Septuagint, that Greek translation of the Old Testament, which they had to produce because the people who went into the dispersion or into captivity lost the speaking of Hebrew and even Aramaic, and they assimilated into speaking Greek and reading Greek. And so that's why we see the primary source that is quoted for the Old Testament is the Septuagint. Mike?
So we see in the New Testament where Christ goes into the synagogue and he asks for the scroll of Isaiah, that would have been a Greek?
No, he would have read, see, in the synagogue, he read Hebrew, but then it had to be explained or translated into Aramaic so the people could fully understand it. There's a 50% overlap between Hebrew and Aramaic in both vocabulary and in grammar. It's like Portuguese and Spanish, or some of those things. You've got an overlap there. So, all right. Well, so the steps for performing a word study. Now, first of all, you select that required, select words that require detail analysis. You can't do them all. Secondly, you determine the range of the meaning for the word. You can do that. We're going to show you how to do that with logos and other things. So this is very preliminary. We're going to kind of give you the steps, but then we're going to tell you you really can't do them until we teach you all these other things in the coming days. All right? And I'll talk to you about all the different tools. Number 3, you examine the usage of the word in the book. Now, I'm going to turn this off for a minute and just illustrate this. And I'm going to give you the big picture now, and then we'll get into the little picture or the details later on. So, all right? If we've got 6 chapters, all right? And you have a word in chapter 4, fellowship, for instance. All right? Now, and you say, what does this word fellowship mean in chapter 4? One of the first things that you have to do is you have to ask yourself, well, did this word occur in chapter 3 or chapter 2 or chapter 1? Because it's very possible that it might have been introduced twice here and once here, and it may have been given some kind of a technical definition. The second thing you ask yourself is, all right, if it didn't happen before, then I'm going to study it in great detail in this context, but then I'm also going to look at chapters 5 and 6 and see, you know, maybe it happens in the latter chapters and it gives me more information about what it means. And when you're studying it within this context, you do have the opportunity to go to something like a logos, and when you open up logos, it's going to give you, you know, certain possibilities. And you have to ask yourself, which of those possibilities best fits into this context? And they will provide for you their opinion. But it is their opinion, and it's usually a pretty good opinion, but it's an opinion that you need to think about. And I'm going to give us an example here. Now, and of course I would raise the question, what in the world are you doing in chapter 4 when you haven't done what?
Read chapter 3.
Pardon me? Gone through 1 through 3.
Right.
Right? Don't be jumping into the middle of a book when you haven't done the others. All right? But after you look at that word in that book and you say to yourself, you know, I'm really not satisfied, then one of the things you have to do is you have to then say, is there any other usage of this word by that author? Because you and I use different words differently, don't we? And therefore, you can't impose your definition upon my definition. I can't impose John's definition on Paul, or Peter's definition on John, or Luke upon Matthew, so on and so forth. Because they do use the words differently within their own personality, their own experience, their own system of words. So this word study part is going to be something much bigger that we're going to build and teach you as we go through, particularly when you study something like Greek. Yes?
Now, would you be able to go to a different book by the same author and look up the
You can go to a different book by the same author, and when you go to that, you want to go to a parallel passage as much as possible. So by going to a parallel passage, for instance, if it's in Ephesians, you'd maybe look in what book?
Galatians?
Well, what's more parallel to Ephesians?
Colossians.
Colossians, right. If you were doing Galatians, you might look in maybe Romans. When it comes to John's vocabulary, you got to stay within John's vocabulary. And John's vocabulary is found in what books? The Gospel of John, First, Second, and Third John, and Revelation, right? So you have all of those within John's corpus. Now, I don't know if it's out yet, but I think it's my article that's coming out in Dallas Seminary's journal on BibSac. One of the reasons why I wrote this article was to correct the translation of this passage, because what writers were doing was they were imposing Paul's definition of something on John. And when you went to John's vocabulary was very, very consistent on the usage of this word. And to the neglect of John's vocabulary, many writers were imposing Luke and Paul on John, and you just can't do that. So you have to go to the author. Now let me give you a simple example here. We're going to look at a verse in Philippians. We're going to look at a verse in Philippians. All right? Philippians chapter 4. It says this, "Not that I speak from want, for I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances I am." The word content, what comes to your mind when you hear the word content? Peter? Satisfied. All right. Anything else?
At ease.
At ease. Settled. Relaxed. Kind of sitting back comfortably and just kind of waiting. You know? Now, we're going to click this on. We're going to look at our ESV, English, Greek, interlinear. We're going to go down. Paul says, "Not that I am speaking from need, but I have," you know what this word is? Manthano. That's our name of our school. Manthano. A V in Greek is pronounced like an N. So you can see M-A-N-T-H-A-N-O for omega. Manthano. In whatever circumstances I am, to be content. Now, I'm going to right-click this, and I'm going to execute a key link, which opens up my Greek lexicons or dictionaries. Now, what do you read there for the meaning of autarkes? Content or what? Self-sufficient. Again, self-sufficient. So when you put that back into this translation, self-sufficient, and notice it only occurs one time in the New Testament. All the others are outside the New Testament. So that's one of the problems that we have with this particular word, is it only occurs one time. Now, if we go up, here is a similar word from the same root, autarkia. It means self-sufficiency in the sense of independence. The state of having what is adequate, sufficiency, a competency. Now, if we plug that meaning back into the translation, not that I speak from what, for I have learned to be competent and self-sufficient in whatever circumstances I am. Because he goes on to say, I know how to get along with humble means, and I know how to live in. Tell me, what is harder spirituality? To live in prosperity or to live in humility? Prosperity is much tougher, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, when you got everything, you end up like Samson. You know, I'm forgetting about God, Mike.
Question for you, when you got that instance where that word only occurs once, in the
Yeah.
Testament, and then you say, yeah, this, and the software goes on and tells you, yeah, this is from this particular word. Always is a trick question, but is it always okay to go back and say, yeah, I can refer to that root word? And
You
use
have
that?
to then. And what you'll learn is when you don't have enough evidence in the New Testament, then you have to go other places. Now I'm going to click it again. I'm going to execute the key link. What we have here is a lexicon called Bauer, Art, Gingrich, and Danker. This, to answer Chris's question, is a lexicon, a Greek dictionary that focuses in on just Bible words. All right? Then there is another one. This is called the Vocabulary of the Greek New Testament. This is by Moulton and Milligan. These were two scholars that said, you know what? We're not going to focus on how they're used in the Bible. We're going to use on how they're used outside the Bible, but during this time, in secular business, concrete ways, right? So here it says, I have a sufficient number of jars, or the tenure of 1 year is sufficient or is enough. And so you have all kinds of examples outside of the theological or the religious context that sometimes gives you very concrete ones. The sense of self-sufficient. Then you can go to another one which will take you back throughout Greek history. And, you know, this takes some learning, but you can go back, self-supporting, independent, to act instinctively, to be self-reliant, able to do things for oneself. So you see, when you start to study the Word, you get a different idea than just passive contentment, don't you? And Paul goes on, I know how to get along with humble means. I know how to live in prosperity. In any and every circumstances I have learned. Oh, we got to take us back there. Let's see. I know how to be brought low. I know how to abound in any and every circumstance. I have learned. Now, this is a different word than Manthano. It's a word which was used by the mystery religions to be brought into a state of higher spirituality. I've learned the secret. I've learned the experience of plenty and hunger, of abundance and need. But rather than talking about self-sufficiency, he says what? I can do all things through the one who empowers or strengthens me. Right? So, what we find out is that what Paul here is not talking about passive contentment, but the ability in every situation to take your spirituality, your spiritual resources, and everything that there is about you, and to put it to work in the situation to have a spiritual competency. Now, there's a real practicality to this. I mean, over the years, you know, in talking with people, I have people come to my office and say, oh, well, I'm out of a job, and, you know, things are bad, but I'm trusting the Lord. Trust in Jesus, amen. Gonna sit and wait. God's gonna provide. God's gonna deliver. I'm claiming the promise. I'm being content. I'm just waiting on the Lord. And I tell them, look, You're misunderstanding this verse. Get up off your tunic. Get out and pound the pavement. Get your resume together. Knock on doors. You can do all things through Christ who strengthens you, but you got to knock on the doors. You got to send out the letters. You can't sit back passive contentment. You got to get going. And the same thing, you know, with people, if people come into a lot of money, it's like, hey, you know, that could not be good for you. I need to sanctify that money for you. You know, I got to make that money holy. Whatever. So you see that words take on meaning in a context. Now, let's go back to our word study notes here. Let me, because these you'll be able to print off, but you don't need to know all this stuff. In that file that I sent everybody, down here on page, 18 or so, are the principles. All right? You select the words that require detail analysis. You examine the word, the usage of the word in the book. Determine the range of the meaning for the word from a resource dictionary. Note the usage by the same writer in a parallel passage. Note the usage by the writer in other books. If you don't have enough information, note the usage in a parallel passage in other books. See, you only keep going out as far as you need to. You don't have to do this all the time. Once you feel like you got a solid definition, then you can stop. And you can feel like you have a good definition. Now, we're going to talk about your assignment. Assignment number 4 is a word study assignment. All right? Assignment number 4. The purpose of this assignment is to have you examine a word in its context. And I guarantee you, if you look at a commentary, or you look at a study Bible, or you look at something like that, you're gonna get it wrong. All right? You're gonna get it wrong, and I'll know it. You're gonna read these passages very carefully and determine the meaning of tongues from the context. Write down the supporting material to prove your interpretation. In other words, you got to say chapter and verse, synonym, antonym, or whatever. What is the meaning of the word tongues in Acts chapter 2, verses 1 through 13? Do an inductive study of tongues using the procedure that was outlined in the class. And we're going to start this one together. Remember that a word and grammar take on meaning in a context. Look for synonyms and illustrations. Give a definition and support for your answer with information from the text. All right? So let's go here to Acts chapter 2. Now, one of the mistakes that people make here is as soon as they come up with a definition, they think that's the only definition. And a word can be, the same word can be used with more than one definition in a context. When the day of Pentecost had come, they were all gathered together in one place. And suddenly there came from heaven a noise like a violent rushing wind, and it filled the whole house where they were sitting. When the day of Pentecost had come, they were all together in one place. Suddenly there came from heaven a noise like a rushing wind, and it filled the whole house where they were sitting. And there appeared to them what? Tongues as of fire, distributing themselves. And they rested on each one of them. And they were all filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak with other tongues. How many usages of the word tongue have we seen in these first 4 verses? At least 2, right? 2. What were the 2? Tongues of fire, and then tongues that are spoken. Right? So we have 2 different definitions here. Correct? You got one there, and you got one here. Now, if I were to say to you, what are tongues, and your understanding of them today, we would have a variety of different answers. You know, some of it's Alibaba, some of it's this, some of it's that, some of it's gibberish. You can type in tongues now, you know, according to, what is it, Juanita Bynum? You know, you got Pat Robertson occasionally just, you know, goes into a ramble or whatever. But our question is not what are tongues today, but what were tongues in the Bible time. And if you're looking for the synonyms and the antonyms, now there were Jews living in Jerusalem, devout men from every nation under heaven, and when this sound occurred, the crowd came together and were bewildered because each one of them was hearing them speak in his own what?
Language.
And what does it say up above?
Tongue.
So what are tongues?
Language.
In Acts chapter 2. Now that's your first clue. That's your first, you're saying, what does the word tongues mean? You go on. You go on. They were amazed and astonished, saying, why are not all these who are speaking Galileans? And how is it that we each hear them speaking in our own language? Why did the translator say language? And then he goes on to say, to which we were born. And then look at all of these languages that he mentions. And then they conclude and say, we hear them speaking in our own tongue. Now, I'm going to switch back to the interlinear for you. And I'm warning you that, I mean, using an interlinear before you're really completely taught how to do it is like going into a dark alley after one karate lesson. And thinking you're going to be safe. So, but it won't take us that long to learn some of these things. But if we go down, and it says, remember it says, because each one was hearing them speak in his own language. Here we have, you can kind of make this out, D-I-A, looks like an L. Dialectos. What dialect, right? There's a lot of Greek words, English words that are built off of Greek words. See, we're hearing it in our own dialectos. If I right-click this, and I go down here, and I execute the key link, and of course I have more books than you have, but this will be available. What does it say? The language of a nation or a region. So in Acts chapter 2, are they speaking?
No.
Are they speaking?
No.
Now, I'm not saying is not real. All I'm saying is that Acts 2 is what? Norman.
Well, can we know what they were actually saying? We only know what people were hearing, not what they were saying.
Ah. So is the miracle in the hearing, or is the miracle in the speaking?
Well, that's the only thing we can infer.
Is that the only thing we can infer?
Well,
Can we look at the text and know more? Because let's see, we've got to get back to the actual text. Where did I put the text? Here it is. When it says we hear them speaking in our own language or tongues speaking the mighty deeds. When we go up above, is the language in the speaker or in the hearer? When they say, where's the Galilean part? Why are not all these who are speaking Galileans, and yet we hear them in our own language? What are they? They are speaking tongues. If they are speaking tongues, they are speaking what? Languages. The people aren't hearing tongues. They are hearing languages. So I suggest that the miracle was in that these Galileans who did not know all these languages are all of a sudden speaking these languages. And but notice all the different language groups.
Yeah.
Yes, Chris?
Would you say that each speaker is speaking a different language, or that each
Right.
speaker is speaking, or all the speakers are speaking one common language, and they're all understanding?
No, because it's in the plural. How is it that we hear them, all of them, in our languages, in the languages of our birth? And so I think what is happening is, because the tongues has fallen upon, and we got to ask ourselves the question, how many did it fall on? You know, there were 120 there on the day of Pentecost. Did it only fall on the disciples? These are great questions. Wonderful, wonderful questions that you're working the text. And that's the thing. You're working the text. Yes, Norman?
So it's not that one person was speaking all these languages at the same time, but that there were several people who
Right.
were speaking one of those languages.
Right, because the tongues distributing themselves, tongues as of fire distributing themselves, and they rested on them. Yes.
Could in verse 6 where it says, you know, if each one of them was hearing them speak, we ask the question, is each one of them speaking or the hearing? Could it be both?
Well, it doesn't need to be both.
No, but I mean, is there something that precludes it from being both?
I think because the disciples, at the very least, were speaking other languages. That's the emphasis. Yes.
All right, when it says tongues of
Not
fire,
loud so I can hear.
when it says tongues of fire, does that mean it says languages of fire?
All right.
Or
All
is it
right.
a description of a flame?
There we go. There we go. See? Are we thinking right here? Now, let's go back to our text. All right? And let's say ask ourselves the question, well, what does the word tongue mean? All right? Here's tongue, glossa. G-L-O-S-S-A, glossa. And we have, glossary. What is a glossary? Pardon me?
Kind of like a dictionary.
Like a dictionary, right? It's a collection of words. Now, I'm going to right-click this. I'm going to execute the key link. And a glossa can be an organ of speech or a tongue. It can be a body of words and system that makes up a distinct language. It can be an utterance outside the normal patterns of intelligent speech, and that's where these dictionary lexicon people make the mistake. And I can tell you why they make the mistake. Because this was a phenomenon that went on in other ancient Near Eastern religions, just like today. There are tongue speakers in Protestantism, in Catholicism, in Buddhism, in Hinduism, in Islam. Tongues is not unique to Christianity. But as we go down further, let me see where we're at here. Let me pick up another one because it's just focusing in on the New Testament period. Notice when we get into the secular usage, anything shaped like the tongue. So, You had the tongue or the reed of a pipe, the tongue of a shoe, a tongue of land. What would we call a tongue of land? A peninsula, right? Or the marking on the liver, where they would, the shape of the liver. So, when you say fire, when you look at a flaming fire, what do the flames look like? They look like a tongue, don't they? As they shoot up, right? As they shoot up. And so the phenomenon that they saw coming down looked like a, as he could describe it, it best looked like a flame tongue of fire that came and rested on the people, and then they began to speak in tongues. So you have two different usages of the word determined by the context, and that's why you have to be sensitive to the context. Yes, Norman?
Is the word fire, is it for literal fire? Because when I think the tongue of
Right.
fire, it could be misconstrued to, because fire and God are
Right, that's
interchangeable,
exactly.
kind of.
So, but you see, Jose is a comparative. And it's separated like tongues as of the tongues or the phenomenon or the not the vision, but the display of what you would see in fire.
Oh, okay.
So it wasn't actually fire. It was a phenomenon that came down that looked like the flames of a fire.
Now, is this a verse that that people misconstrue to mean like the language of God? Because I've heard of.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Because that's what I thought when I read it. Like the tongue of fire could be the language of God.
But in the context, it's not the language of God, is it?
Right. Yeah.
It's what, Kim?
In the same, like you were saying, description, could it be said in the gospel when they say the Holy Ghost descended like a dove, people start putting dove.
Right, he wanted a dove. He went up like a dove. It's a metaphor. He went up like a dove.
But people interpret it, you see a lot of dove. You know
Sure.
what I'm saying? Because they said, and would that be the same like they use in tongues right here?
Right.
Tongues of fire.
Right, right. But I think we're all getting it. We're getting that the context determines the meaning. And so in Acts chapter 2, what we have here is a definition for us, at least what biblical tongues are. Now we're going to go to 1 Corinthians chapter 14, and we're going to study tongues. But 1 Corinthians 14 is a different author, right? So we're going to have to look at 1 Corinthians 14, and we're going to have to do an analysis as much as we can of 1 Corinthians, and you're still going to have to go over Acts 2 in detail, because I want you to, I want you to do that, break it down, so on and so forth. But now you're going to read 1 Corinthians 14 and write down any contextual clues that help you to define the word tongues in this passage. You must be sensitive to synonyms, words that are similar, antonyms, references to the Old Testament, illustrations from the text. Then you're going to look up the definition of tongues in a Bible dictionary encyclopedia, and how does the resource definition compare to your contextual study. But I want you to, to go through all the details, comb through the text. If you don't comb through the text, you're going to miss some clues. They're not easy to find. And then you write me just a short paragraph. This is what tongues is in Acts chapter 2. This is what tongues is in 1 Corinthians 14. And then this is how it compares to my own study. So, question? Yeah, Norm?
When you said that you have to think about the word only as the author would have used it, Can you use other authors' usages as supporting details but not foundational details?
Well, what you have to do is you have to let Paul be Paul, and then compare Paul to Luke.
Okay.
You know, and say, do they agree? Do they disagree?
Right. Okay.
So, but remember that 1 Corinthians 14. Now I'm going to have you focus on 1 Corinthians 14, but you know, tongues is used earlier in the book of 1 Corinthians. But I'm not going to send you all the way there because there's enough that's just to comb through carefully, thinking about this, you know. Other,
So, could you say that over again, what you want us to do?
Yeah.
As far as the Bible dictionary?
the Bible dictionary is only for you to then compare what the Bible dictionary says tongues is versus what you've discovered from only reading the Bible.
So that's the Bible dictionary and what you discovered from reading the Bible.
Right. Are they the same? Are they different? And what I'm trying to get you to understand is that with proper hermeneutics and careful reading of the text, you're going to get a whole lot more out of the text. As opposed to if you just jump to the Bible dictionary, you don't know if they're right or they're wrong. You know, Clarence?
Yes, sir, Dr. McLean, text being the Bible itself.
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
New American
Perfect.
Standard Translation.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Do you suggest we do several translations or just stick
No, just stick with New American Standard because the New American Standard is the best one for this word study, and it's the most consistent for you. Yes, Kim?
Even though we got our assignments in chapter 14, we have to go all the way back.
No, you don't have to go back.
Okay.
You'll have enough, but notice my hint. Be sensitive to synonyms, antonyms, references to the Old Testament, and illustrations from the text. These are the contextual clues that will give you the validation. In other words, if I stand up and I say to you, this is what tongues are in 1 Corinthians 14, and you say to me, why do I believe that? I'd better be able to go to the text and say, the chapter and verse. This is why I say what it is. That, you can look at what I say chapter and verse and text is, and then you can agree or disagree. So based on the text. But you can't come back to me and say, well, this is my feeling. This is my experience. This is what the Lord told me. You know? That doesn't work. Yes, Priscilla. I gotta be able to hear you because I've got.
Tongue is mentioned about 50 times. What do we use a special guide, or do we go through each one and figure out if it's the same meaning, or?
For 1 Corinthians 14?
Yes,
Yes, you have to go through and say, is it the same meaning? Is it a different meaning? Do I have different meanings like I had with Acts chapter 2? So,
With the Bible dictionary, without anything else.
but no, you don't use the Bible dictionary until you're all done, because the Bible dictionary will make you wrong. Evil Bible dictionary. Evil Bible dictionary.